So I was finally doing that Windows 95 story a friend was begging me for since months, and while I intended to look into emulating Windows 95 on an SGI workstation, I ended up taking a detour into emulating SGI IRIX by means of MAME, originally known as the Multi Arcade Machine Emulator. Obsolete computer technology is my passion. I'm the vintage collector, and these are my stories. Actually, I didn't plan into venturing into emulating an SGI machine, but rather taking another look at Insignia's SoftWindows 95, which allowed you to run a virtual PC not only on the Mac, but also on Unix workstations. Today, we're not gonna look into this topic yet for the most, as this is subject to the next episode. But I can tell you how the super slow processing speed on the Indy drove me nuts. So I ended up investigating if there were earlier versions of Insignia's SoftWindows that might have been actually better suited for the Indy specs. And indeed there was. I found this copy on archive.org, which apparently suited for running on multiple historic Unix releases, including SGI IRIX. But what a downer when I found that it wouldn't actually install due to compatibility reasons on SGI IRIX 6.5, which was running at the Indy at the time. Now, I could have just gone and reinstalled the Indy with IRIX 5.3 right away, but the scarce README provided on the ISO image didn't really mention which release of IRIX it was intended to run. If only I could emulate an SGI machine, so I could try this out without wasting time on the real gear. SGI emulation is something many enthusiasts have been wanting since years, but so far it didn't materialize. At least that's what I thought. But I gave it a try on Google anyways, and can you believe how surprised I was to find that MAME added support for emulating some SGI machines with release 0.207 in 2019. I didn't check this for years, and it's sort of yesterday's news, but for me in this very moment it was the answer to all of my problems. So I followed this very comprehensive tutorial. While I'm running on a Mac, I installed MAME from Mac ports using the port install MAME command. For the initial test, I simply fired up MAME first time via the UI myself, just to see how it looks like. One can select from different ROM versions of the ARIX firmware, where I chose to go with the most recent one. Oh. Wow, look at this! How beautiful this is to see the ARIX firmware loading up, even with the original splash screen. It gives me all the regular boot options, including the command monitor, from which I can run the HINV command to inspect the inventory. The emulation gives me an Indy R4600. It's supposed to be a 100 MHz emulation, but it seems to be running at 50 MHz only, probably limited by the performance specs of my host machine. Other than that, it provides me 24-bit graphics and 128 MB of RAM. That's very decent specs for an emulation. In order to run my emulation, I had beforehand prepared myself like this. I created a MAME directory in my home directory, containing two folders for the ROMs and the SGI IRIX. The former contains the ROM files the tutorial pointed you to download. The latter contains the virtual hard drive image I had created, plus various installation ISO files. Also, I created a startup.sh script, which would allow me to run it without going through the MAME UI or memorizing the actual CLI arguments. But as you can see here, whenever I was trying to run the script, I'd get this message about the -gio_gfx argument being unknown. Now, I was taking this one-to-one from the tutorial, but obviously something had changed since the initial writing. So I fired it up manually again and checked if I maybe could see some arguments being passed to the process command line. In fact there were, though not the ones I was looking for. Eventually I temporarily removed the -GIO_GFX option from the script, and voila, the emulation at least came up.
But this is totally unsatisfying. It works, but you don't know why. You can just let it be like this.
Exactly, so I was looking around the logs once more and then spotted this section where it actually refers to the graphics option, but not by GIO_GFX, but rather GIO64_GFX. Can it be as simple as that? So I gave it a shot, changing the script to read -GIO64_GFX for the graphics parameter, and voila, this made it work. So for one thing, it seems obviously not to be a required parameter, as the emulation just picked something by itself. On the other hand, if you would really like to run the graphics in either 8-bit or 24-bit mode, then the CLI argument surely comes in handy. Now, I could maybe have done this simpler as well. Coming with literally zero knowledge on MAME, I was only reading around the man pages rather late into the process. Eventually, I found the list devices command, which shows the components supported by the emulation. Coming from here, I might have as well deducted that the graphics should be named GIO64 rather than just GIO. I then checked as well if I could override the system RAM, giving it 256 MB instead of the default 128 MB. But here I was totally unsuccessful. I checked out if others had the same issue when I found this note on the IRIX.net forums. So it seems that at the time, the RAM is hard-coded and needs manual patching for it to be increased. Well, I didn't want to go down this route, and 128 MB of RAM is really enough for my testing at the time. What I would still need to do is to set the Ethernet MAC address in the command monitor. I'm just adding a random MAC address here. All is fine as long as it starts with 08:00:69, which is SGI's reserved vendor range. Then I'm turning over to installing SGI IRIX release 5.3. And here we see how truthful the original emulation is, as you have to run the very same command sequences on the emulated command monitor as on the real gear. First, I'm firing up the sash, the standalone shell, from which I'm then running FX, the partitioning utility. Once the virtual hard drive is prepared, I simply exit FX to come back to the PROM. From here, I can run the system installation, which would start by copying the initial files over. It would however be repeatedly stuck at the end of the copying process. At this point, neither the mouse would move anymore, nor would it ever continue. I tried a few times and eventually came to the conclusion that maybe the IRIX 5.3 image I had was faulty. So I tried another one I found here, the IRIX 5.3 for R4K and R5K machines, which then eventually worked. But what is this? The entire screen is off scale. Now this is really weird, and it complicates the installation a bit, as I have to do most of it half blind. Not the best way in fact. At least I can shift the text output to the upper area by just pressing enter here and there. I hope that this disappears once the system is finally installed. Now, I won't be going through explaining the installation procedure, as there's plenty of videos and online tutorials out there already. All what matters is, does the screen distortion go away or not? And the answer is no. Unfortunately, it stays all the same. I have the strange feeling I should try setting the screen resolution from the command monitor. Now, SGI is always ever run in graphics mode, so the screen resolution is actually set from the PROM. It can be left unset, then the machine just tries the best resolution it can. This is the default. As we can see here, there's currently no value set for the monitor. I set monitor equals I, which means to use a 1024x768 resolution, but that obviously didn't do anything. So I tried again, this time setting monitor equals H, which forces a 1280 by 1024 resolution. And see how this makes a difference. It all looks totally as it should now. IRIX now runs the file system check, as I had forcibly shut down the emulation before. It just takes a brief moment to run easy setup for the initial and, indeed, very basic configuration. After a reboot and logging into the root account, I then...
Did you really just log into the root account without any password? This seems really dangerous for a freshly installed system.
Ah yes, indeed. The out-of-box experience of an SGI machine was not very secure, to say it nicely. But there is some references available online that can help in securing a default IRIX install. Anyways, IRIX is that old and without further security patches since almost 20 years that even with hardening applied, one should definitely not connect it directly to the internet. It doesn't matter though for my experiment here, as I was going to say the network integration doesn't seem to work for me. Neither can I ping something on the network, nor do I get layer 2 address resolution protocol messages. I don't need the networking at the time, as I want to check the compatibility of SoftWindows 2.0. But I'm surely having a deeper look into the network topic again, as I can tell at the time if I simply have a misconfiguration on MAME's side, or maybe hit an issue by merely running the entire thing on Mac OS. At least, there's also some messages in the debug log, indicating the network card dropping packets due to a buffering overrun. But let's focus on SoftWindows 2.0. The CD-ROM contains a few directories, and most notably a README file and a script named swinst. Now, according to the README file, it's good for Sun OS and Solaris, IBM's AIX and HP Unix, though no word of mention of IRIX. But the CD-ROM itself contains an SGI folder, so it should be okay. I simply try running the swinst script from the CD-ROM's root directory, which will indicate me then that the files are located in the dist folder and I should run inst or software manager to carry out the installation. All of this is indicative to SGI IRIX, but there's just one problem. There is no dist folder. There's only the SGI folder, which I believe is what they meant. Also, the find command didn't reveal a dist folder. Oh, and this one here is not me typing wrong, but actually a glitch I observed a few times while working on the emulation. At least for me, when typing too quickly, the emulation seems to swallow a few characters here and there. This is totally annoying. Also annoying was this odd misbehavior here. The CD-ROM seemed to fail to mount repeatedly, no matter how I tried, even after rebooting everything. Maybe the ISO image I had was incomplete. SGI CDs typically had a very special labeling scheme. Any raw ISO images captured from SGI CDs would typically not open correctly on most systems and applications, as they wouldn't know how to handle the disk label correctly. The SoftWindows 2.0 ISO I had, on the other hand, opened just fine on Mac OS, telling me it's in fact a standard ISO file and not the SGI specific disk format. And obviously, inst is now refusing to read it, as it's expecting the SGI volume header to be present. In the end, I simply copied everything off the CD-ROM over to a temporary location on the hard drive to then run inst from there. And this then seemed to work, at least to that point, when it started complaining about the missing dependency on eoe2.sw.gifts_perl. So I had then to go briefly back to the SGI IRIX 5.3 CD to install the missing dependency from there, which in turn allowed me to finally install SoftWindows 2.0. I did only a brief startup test to see if SoftWindows would start. As many software products, SoftWindows needed a license. But since there was no license yet installed, I'd get just this fancy message here. Don't worry, we'll be looking into this in more detail in the next episode. I saw what I wanted to see, and so I can finally turn away from the emulation back to the real Indy, where I'm hooking up an external CD-ROM drive in order to install SGI IRIX 5.3. The installation follows the same procedure as was doing on the emulated Indy before. As soon as the dist installer appears on screen, I would add the additional Perl package right away, so it'll be there later on when installing SoftWindows. The installation then went on without any further turbulences. What I noticed is how quick IRIX 5.3 seems to run on the Indy as when compared to IRIX 6.5. Admittedly, I had never ever used 5.3. The time I started my first job in the late 90s, our SGI machines ran either 6.4 or 6.5. And I actually never had bothered to dive into IRIX 5, as many things, like the freework or in later years NecoWare, all needed 6.5 at least. However, with the Indy being a child of 1993, its period correct OS would actually have been IRIX 5, so it's no surprise it actually feels like running on steroids. What I did find myself confronted with though was then this real SCSI error complaining about timeouts on ID4, which is the CD-ROM drive. Well, I suspect it has something to do with the SCSI termination, and the drive I have actually doesn't have a terminator in place, as actually I have misplaced the Centronics terminator somewhere. Though I'm pretty much sure that I had jumpered the auto termination power on the CD-ROM drive to be enabled. What's odd, however, that it worked and didn't complain during the installation phase. Luckily, I have a second external drive available, so I try using this one. While it doesn't have the terminator plug on it as well, it has a built-in terminator which simply can be enabled using a backside switch. And the difference was clearly visible then in the command monitor, as the drive would not show up as ID4 with termination power disabled, but only with the termination power enabled. But still, IRIX would continue to report those weird SCSI timeouts on the SCSI CD-ROM drive. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with the termination, and it's all well possible of being one of these occasions where bus termination power is not good enough, but you need an actual termination plug instead to make it disappear. But with my currently displaced termination plug, I have to search it first to nail this down. But anyway, I'm ready now to explore SoftWindows 2.0 on the real Indy for the upcoming episode. So finally, emulation for SGI gear is here, and I really had that impressive wow moment when I saw the emulation coming up with the ARC's console, just like on the original. The emulation is not complete from a hardware perspective, as only few machines are currently emulated, but it's good enough for a quick look into SGI IRIX. Needs some more development though, for example to support changing the RAM inside the emulated workstation and using the -RAM parameter. Also, some people claimed the network emulation worked for them perfectly, while for me it did not. Apparently, this may well be because of me running it on Mac OS, as opposed to others possibly running it on Windows or Linux. The emulation speed on my 2015 iMac was not top-notch, but I'd say it was pretty fair, and it allowed me to check the software compatibility of SoftWindows 2.0 with IRIX 5.3 before screwing up my real SGI Indy workstation. And with that being done now, we can have a look into SoftWindows emulation on IRIX in the next upcoming episode. I'm the Vintage Collector, and this was my story. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.
Next on the Vintage Collector. This is terrible. The Indy barely copes with SoftWindows 95. It's so painfully slow. And I wanted to try SoftWindows 2.0, but FlexLM wouldn't accept a license, no matter what. Is this the end?
If you check out this channel's community tab, you'll find some polls on potential upcoming videos. You're very welcome to upvote on upcoming topics or drop in new ones you'd like me to chase down.